I struggled quite a bit with chronic anxiety growing up in secondary school or high school, and had my first panic attack when I was 16. Mental health care, mental health support, it's so misunderstood, right? People perceive it as this very, very scary, idea that you only seek help if you are severely depressed or even crazy. Yeah, a founder's journey has many highs and many, many lows. Oftentimes more lows in the beginning than highs. This leads to quite a fluctuation of a person's state of well-being. Like when you enter Japan, it is not just a sales effort. Japan requires a proper investment to enter. If you crack it, I think it's a massive market that has huge, deep potential.
I'm excited to be joined by Theodoric Chew, who is the co-founder and CEO of Intellect. So Intellect is one of the leading mental health platforms in this region, but they've also expanded beyond Southeast Asia and also in Japan. So talking about Japan market expansion, I think it's something that a lot of Southeast Asia founders dream of, but only a few actually have done. So we want to talk about, market expansion and making a leap, but not just from a business angle, but from, diving into Theo's personal stories as well. So Theo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, to kick us off, can you please give us a quick introduction of yourself and what you're building in Intellect?
Sure. So, thanks for having me. I'm Theo. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Intellect. For those listening in, Intellect, to give a very brief overview, we are a healthcare startup, particularly focused on the space of mental health. A brief history. So Intellect, we founded the company about over 5 years ago, and we launched just as the pandemic was kicking off out of Singapore. So we're a Singapore-founded company, and we had a simple but ambitious mission to reboot how mental health care is done, how mental health care is accessed. And I'll explain what we mean by that in a bit. But the short of it, what drove us into this space, it's through personal lived experience. I'll expand more on that later. But also seeing a very clear gap in the ecosystem. I think we saw a lot of innovation happening in other pillars of healthcare, primary, specialized, tertiary care. But mental health care is one that was traditionally very taboo, not talked about, and hence not really innovated through. But the issues in mental health care were so prevalent globally and definitely in Asia as well. So that's what got us thinking about how can we actually address and tackle this issue, and that's what got us kicked off on this journey. So Intellect today, to give some background for the listeners, we have grown and scaled over the last 5+ years, objectively today to become Asia's leading mental health care platform. We provide a whole range of mental health care services, from very preventative, digital, self-guided, and AI-led care, all the way towards higher acuity, complex care that's human-led as well. So we bring together a blend of digital as well as clinically led care at scale. We work a lot with employers, insurers, and these days even governments and schools as well. And one of the big draws is that today Intellect serves over 4 million lives worldwide. And a big part of why we've been able to do this is because we have localized all that we've done into probably the most localized mental health platform out there. Intellect's available in 40+ languages. We've built a clinical network in over 100 countries. So what that means is that we have clients with employees or users based out of Mexico, Japan, Korea, India, to get the same experience, the same parity of care in a local native tongue. And just a bit of the funding history, we've been quite fortunate to have been backed by great investors from YC, Tiger Global, Insignia, and a whole lot more of great investors that have allowed us to really innovate and drive change in this space. So back to the focus of this session, we made the leap into entering Japan about 2.5 years back, or a bit more than that now. And it's been definitely a very, very, big endeavor for us, right? Japan is a market that is huge, but not easy to crack, as many would have seen. And I'm happy to share more about that later as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'd love to talk about the Japan entry, but I want to focus first on your personal journey. Going to the very beginning, I understand you entered into entrepreneurship at very, young age. What made you take that such a different route at early on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, very brief history of myself personally. Born and raised in Singapore, went through the education system, but along the way really got into building stuff on the internet by my own. And a lot of these earlier endeavors were not big startups or anything. It was just simple online businesses, drop shipping, ad arbitrage, all this kind of random stuff that I read online on forums, tried it out. Most of them failed, but I learned the ropes, I would say, on how the internet could get me doing things. And I've always had a very strong interest on building things myself. And I think quite early on I recognized what I was good at and where I wasn't, importantly. Right? I think that's always been quite a clear pattern and trend that I've seen as to really leveraging where I'm great at. And the short of it, I figured pretty early on that I did much better building things myself as opposed to trying to climb the proverbial corporate ladder per se. And not just that, but building things really excited me a lot more. So after a string of online businesses, I embarked on one of my more serious projects and endeavors as one of my first startups, which was a digital media platform. This, I think I founded the company probably when I was about 18, 19 or so. Bootstrapped it. At a point, it wasn't really a startup even. It was more of a website where, long story short, we wanted to build the antithesis to BuzzFeed, basically. I think BuzzFeed was all the rage back then. A lot of, entertaining quizzes and clickbaity stuff. At the point in my life, I was very big on self-help. So a common thread that, really, really guides me in what I work on, it's things that personally interest me. So I was big on things like Tony Robbins and all of those experts out there. And I was thinking, like, if people are spending this amount of time consuming, clickbait stuff, what if they spend the same amount of time learning and educating themselves? So that's what, drove the initial idea. It was a content-based platform, a lot of guest writing, very lean operation. And we managed to, very, very luckily get it to a decent readership. And then cutting short that, 2-year journey, we had a small offer from an acquirer. And we took that, and that was a very small exit, but it got me really excited about what tech could be, and that's what began my tech journey from there.
Right, that's really impressive. But I think still entering into entrepreneurs so young is very it involves a lot of risk. So I think being a founder, I think a lot of founders have this kind of internal drive that pushes them to take a risk and continue those tough times. Where would you say your drive comes from?
Yeah, and I'll be quite candid. I think being an entrepreneur, being a business person, the more traditional term, there's probably a few different prerequisites and things that aid this journey. I think on the personal front, I have the benefit of being the youngest of a fairly large family. So I've got quite a number of siblings, and I would say I have the fortune of very candidly not having as much pressure on myself to take risks and take bets. I think flipping on that side, if I was the oldest in the family, I might still have. But it may not have been as straightforward if, I had to put food on the table, make sure I was the reliable, sturdy one that, kept things going. So I'd say I firstly had the benefit of being able to take more risks.
Right.
Having, older siblings that have gone through the flow. So that was a beneficial thing. But I think the second thing, it's also really quite early on doing a lot of self-reflection and realizing what motivates me and importantly, what doesn't. And I think for me, 2 key things really ring true for me, and one of it, as I briefly mentioned, working on things that I personally am passionate about. So if you ask me, we're in the space of mental health care, are there other sectors that are way more exciting, way more, well-backed and all of that? Sure, there are, but I couldn't see myself as actively working on it for the long haul. So I think that's something that personally motivates me.
Right.
Different founders may not operate the same way. That's completely fine. But at least for me, that's something that I feel is important for me. And the second thing is, being able to build something that can actually impact people and change how things is done or are done. That's also something that really, really excites me versus, running a process that's already built and optimizing something. So building something that really excites me, and I think it's probably a common thread for a lot of founders and entrepreneurs that embark on this journey. So it's a mix of, I would say, risk appetite and drive to want to do something that fills me.
Yeah. That leads to our next question. You talked a little bit on your personal experience to start the mental health space, but what was the the experience that made you start and enter into mental health space?
Yeah, so it is a personal one. I think the short of it, I personally have my own lived mental health journey since a pretty young age. I started seeing a psychologist when I was about 16, and the prelude to that, I struggled quite a bit with chronic anxiety growing up in secondary school or high school, and had my first panic attack when I was 16. So at a point in time, naturally I did a lot of self-Googling, self-diagnosis with whatever I had online.
Right.
And I figured I probably needed to speak to someone, right, when I had my first panic attack. So I count myself quite lucky because my parents, I grew up in a fairly traditional Asian household, and that meant parents that may not be that open to the idea of mental health as a concept, right? Because, we're taught to just, be strong and suck it up and move forward. But I'll say quite thankfully, my parents, while they did not fully understand what mental health issues were, they were open enough to let me seek help when I asked them for it. So hence where, I managed to see a psychologist, and my first therapy session was a super cathartic one that I remember till this day. Two takeaways I had from my first, therapy session was, number one, mental health care, mental health support, it's so misunderstood, right? People perceive it as this very, very scary, idea that you only seek help if you are severely depressed or even crazy, right? And I think that's commonly, what we've been taught growing up. And the second thing was, I realized quite quickly, if people knew what therapy, counseling is, everyone will be on it, right? It's something that's so cathartic. My journey with my therapist over the years went from coping with my issues towards bettering who I was as a person, right? And that's the journey that we at Intellect also try to endeavor. No matter where you're at, there's no one size fits all. Some people have very, very mild proactive issues. Some people have more complex, severe conditions, and that's fine. So come as you will, come as you are, and then, we'll find the right level of care that supports you on that.
Right. And I think that goes for founders as well. I think being founder is so tough, and people don't talk about mental health so much when it comes to, running a company. But how do you see, founders usually deal with mental health?
Yeah. I think it's a good question. I think the good thing is over the last few years, burnout, and mental health struggles in general as a whole has just risen in a lot more awareness.
Right.
We've seen it spoken a lot more in public, in media. We've seen celebrities come out and speak up openly about it, which has been great for the awareness building. There's still work to be done on the action-taking side, but I think fantastic effort collectively as a society that now at least empathizes with the issue at hand and not instinctively judges it or jumps to call it out in another way. So I think awareness has been built. When we talk about the founder journey itself, so naturally a question I get asked often is, how do you do it as a founder? And there's so many things you have to see. It must be stressful and all of that. My first honest take is, I think a founder's journey is stressful, but so is any role. Right? I think how you manage it is really important, but an intern could be as stressed as I am, or possibly more stressed if he or she perceives it to be a world-changing issue or mistake that happens that's going to affect everything. So I think first and foremost, I think stress, burnout affects everyone, but naturally there's a lot more spotlight on the founders given how much responsibilities that is bearing on them. So when I think about the founder journey, I think the issue here, however, it's how a founder and a leader in general is perceived to need to be a strong, stable person. And this is something that hence you find it often quite hard for founders to open up openly to people outside of the founder circle, right? To peers in the exec team, to their staff, even to their family members, as an example. So I think this is the first thing, because they are perceived to have to be this rock for the company. And even though in every startup things are chaotic, things are messy, they have to be stable and put on the front. So I think that first and foremost prevents the acknowledgement or outlet for one to access, to be real with themselves or where they're at. I think the second thing is, as we hear very often, it's a founder's journey has many highs and many, many lows. Oftentimes more lows in the beginning than highs. And this leads to quite a fluctuation of a person's state of well-being, right? So it's not the best environment for one to be the most mentally healthy. I think there has to be other intrinsic motivations for why one wants to be a founder, because it will take you on quite a journey. So yeah, I mean that's some of the key facts. It is one that really takes you through high highs and really low lows. I think what it's important to a founder, and I read this recently from a Paul Graham tweet, I think from a while back. I think it's really important for a founder to recognize what excites and interests them in the company for the long haul more intrinsically. Otherwise, they will very quickly face burnout or find themselves questioning why they're doing this. If they can't find a way to intrinsically be very motivated by what they're working on, for whatever reason it could be. It could be financial outcomes, it could be for the mission, it could be for the achievement and growth they have as an individual, as a founder. But finding that drive for the long term, it's really important. And I think a lot of times when the going gets rough, if a founder doesn't have that, it gets quite tricky for them to balance themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And you talked about your excitement about entering into mental health, and and you had this idea of an intellect. And how did you then go about validating that idea?
Yeah. So briefly, which I missed to mention, after my first startup, I didn't go straight into building something else. I spent a couple of years working in different tech companies, VC, essentially to learn the ropes. Right, I was in my early 20s, and I figured, even though I had one little win under my belt, I really knew so little, and the best way to kind of learn, and that's where I made the choice, instead of going to university, to instead learn the ropes by doing, right, and getting paid on the job while I learn as well. So that was actually a pretty fun experience. I spent time in different firms. One of the experiences was actually working in a Japanese travel tech firm, and that was my first time being exposed to the Japanese market.
Right.
Very different play. It's consumer, it was travel tech. The firm eventually got acquired by Rakuten, which was also quite an interesting experience. So I had a chance to lead, one of the marketing functions, the growth functions, and learn a lot of how this fast-growing startup did things. I then spent a bit of time in a venture builder that looked a lot at, incubating individuals to become founders and then scaling from there as well. So over these roles, I got, different experiences, different skill sets of how the tech startup world worked on both sides of the coin, from a operator to a briefly a venture side as well. So that's what got me the skills that I felt was important to get into this. So with that background, how we got started validating intellect, I think one of the biggest lessons that I hold quite strong and true, it's important to find the problem to fixate your business around or startup around, rather than a sexy idea around it. Right. So, AI is all the rage now, but when I was in this venture builder, which was a deep tech focused one, AI was really a thing maybe like 8-9 years, for a long time. It's been around for a long time, but it was also quite a big thing at the point. But what I found was a lot of founders, prospective ones, wanted to do something in AI, but didn't have a very clear wedge as to what they were trying to solve. And I think that where you don't want to find yourselves in a place is when you spend a couple months building something without a problem to solve for, and then when you launch it, it's with to no demand. So for us, we did it the other way around. We spent a lot of time validating what the issue was. We knew we wanted to tackle the mental health care space, but there's a million ways you can tackle any space, right? So we spent a lot of time, speaking with stakeholders, from HR professionals to psychologists to consumers on the street, just to get a sense of what exactly are things to solve. And we launched basically a bunch of landing pages, early outset, with different propositions, and started collecting type form responses. And we actually got one that really struck a nerve with a lot of people. We had hundreds of type form responses, and the very simple, clear takeaway from these, this experiment we ran was that for mental health, people struggled, but they didn't know where to start. So they gave us a very clear problem statement to work on. It's how do we help people take the first step in mental health care? So linking back to when we began our journey, the very first iteration of Intellect was not this full stack ambitious goal, but it was a very clear, simple, digitally led mental health care companion. So it's self-guided care, scalable, and that's where we began our journey, and then we built from there.
Right. I think going back to that drive, I think that passion to really solve the issue that you're focusing on kind of pushes you to really, give the product that the customer will be satisfied with. So that's very insightful, and I think a lot of founders can relate to that. So I think now that we covered your personal stories, I'd like to move on to business, specifically how you entered into Japan. So could you share a bit on, how you decided to expand beyond Southeast Asia and how Japan came into that picture?
Sure. So, Intellect's a Singapore-founded company, and I think with that, Singapore is a huge market if you're playing at a B2B place. But what you often hear at Singapore, it's a great beachhead to validate.
Right.
But naturally, it's not the biggest market out there. Although I would argue actually Singapore for B2B is actually a very deep market you can get into, given how many companies are headquartered here as well. But that aside, we always knew from day one we wanted to build something that's more than just Singapore, more than just Southeast Asia. We want to build something at least regional, if not global. So for us early on, we focused a lot on building something that could scale across countries, and that meant building a very localized platform. So back to the point I shared earlier, we invested since day one to localize into different languages. And that paid off well, right? So we were able to expand with our clients into more and more markets organically as we brought them on. And as we thought about which were the key areas and places we want to expand into, we thought about I think two very simple key ideas: which market has a clear pain point around mental health,
Right.
and secondly, which market has the ability to invest in healthcare in a mature way, right? And Japan naturally was one of the top on that list, right? So. And that is probably a conclusion that a lot of people find themselves in. Which market is big? You often find yourselves in Japan, but it's I think it's a nuanced one that needs quite a bit of thought around as to just because it's big doesn't mean it's the market you get into. So for us, I think when we look at any market entry, and I think this applies to any industry, it's you have to look at the go-to-market motion, right? If you're a healthcare firm, how's the PS system set up, right? Is it set up to support your distribution channel, or do you have to tweak it and adjust it? Just because it's a big market doesn't mean it's one that's set up for you to succeed as well. So we spend a lot of time understanding that market, and then figuring out how can we go about it. But we eventually landed on a couple of key markets. Japan was one of the ones that we felt had all the right ingredients, and we felt we had the right to win, as the saying goes, right? Within a 3-year frame, right? So that's what got us into it, and I can delve into more details. But we were very, very clear we couldn't do it ourselves. I think one of the very common things that you would see it's the Japanese population trusts Japanese brands quite a bit, and I think you can speak better to that than I do. But having spent a bit of time working on the market in my previous roles, I recognize trust was a very key factor. So that's where we decided to bring on Japanese investors that could help us on this journey, right? And I can expand on this more, but that that helped a lot in actually where we played the expansion roadmap.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Japan is a big market, but at the same time, it's very difficult to crack into. And the Japanese trust is something that, once you crack in, it's very sticky. But gaining that trust takes usually a long time. Could you maybe share a bit more on the early journey of entering into Japan and what are kind of specific steps that you took?
Yeah. So I think that there's the bigger picture, and then if we have time we can go into more of the tactical stuff as well. But I think the bigger picture, going to Japan, it's not like a founder and an exec team has to be quite clear. When you enter Japan, it is not just a sales effort. Japan requires a proper investment to enter, right? So you can't just think about it. And we had a lot of lessons going in early on because we had already built Intellect to be a product that had entered different markets, different languages even. So we had thought, okay, this product probably will work. Let's hire a couple of commercial guys and local guys that are commercial, and then let's let it run. Very quickly we got the feedback that the product was bad. It wasn't bad, but the thing was it was not built for the Japanese audience, right? So the UI, the UX was actually different. Same, you look at how Amazon is set up and how Shopee is set up. Very different interface, but it works really well for respective markets. And Japan is one that has its own unique flavor. How the Japanese people like to interact with platforms. So that's something we learned quite early on, that localizing for the market did not just entail a commercial effort. It needed a proper investment in how you build a local product as well.
Right.
So that's I think the first key thing. Entering Japan, it's not just a simple sales effort. It does require a proper investment, operationally, product wise, and all of that. And then I think the second thing, it's really, as we talked about, having a clear idea as to what are your early trust factors that you can actually push, right? Meaning to say, how can you quickly associate yourselves with a couple of trusted Japanese brands or associations that will help build that credibility early on? Because going as a young startup is already hard enough, but going as a foreign young startup, it's even harder as well. So I think for us, we brought on a couple of trusted CVCs, local investors that have been around for industry for a long time that could help make. I think that's one of the key things. Entering new market, it always helps to bring on a local investor because they can help open doors for you there. They help build trust for the market. Japan or otherwise, but definitely for Japan, it really matters. So that helped us a lot. We managed to get in with quite a big launch, got a couple of like Nikkei pieces out there, which helped a lot of our initial entry, and then started building with the partners we brought on.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think having Japanese investors will help build that trust. And I think I've seen a lot of startups trying to enter into Japan and they just focus on sales and realize that they didn't really understand the nuances and their sales is not going as expected and they pull right away. So I think that's a bit of waste of, cost to enter into Japan without really understanding the Japan ecosystem. And because I'm Japanese and I spent most of the time in Japan, I understand a lot of, very unique business culture, very different from Asian culture. Was there any challenges around, cultural differences or any surprises that you had entering into Japan?
Definitely. I think quite a number of stark differences in terms of business culture, but I think a pleasant kind of fun story. It's I remember one of the first, after we set up the entity, we had a team there. We took up space in a co-working with our own office, and we actually hosted a potential partner from a big firm. And what was quite interesting, being a startup, generally it's a bit more casual. You meet people informally, but I think as you may know, I'm leading with this. When they visited us, this was a huge company, by the way. They brought in a team of close to 10 people, all in suits, and formally came in to one by one shake our hands, and like it was a very pleasant different experience as compared to what we were generally more used to. So that kind of gives a flavor as to, I think, formality and process is quite important in Japan.
Yeah.
So I would say, when we think about Japan as a market, it's a market that founders need to be able to place a patient bet, right? It's not one that you can get an immediate quick return.
Yep.
But if you crack it, I think it's a massive market that has huge, deep potential. So I think one, you have to be quite patient about it. You have to build trust and credibility, and then once you get a certain threshold, which will take time, the sales cycles for B2B firms, it's very different in Japan as compared to any Western multinational company. But once you get a couple of wins, that momentum does build up, it does compound, the trust builds, and then that's where things will start taking off.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and you touched a little bit, but a lot of founders here in Southeast Asia are curious but a bit hesitant on Japan. What would you say are the most common misconceptions that founders here often have about Japan market?
I think I'll give a maybe two-sided thought. And one that I briefly mentioned, I think many people recognize Japan as a massive market, and they're right to think so, right? It is, I think, the third largest economy, or there. So it's a massive economy, and people there are willing to pay for quality, which is something that, if it is a Southeast Asian founder listening in, it's something that you don't find as often in the region, right? Which is customers willing to pay for a premium for quality.
Right.
So I think Japan has that benefit and perk. So that part is true, but on the flip side, don't get too immediately quick to jump in. I think one needs to recognize that Japan is a very nuanced market. Many big firms have tried entering the market, like food delivery to e-com and all of them, but it's not been easy. At the same time, there are multiple successful stories of companies actually entering from outside and building a great story as well. So I think the key thing is, it is big, but you do have to validate, is it a market that fits, your product will fit in?
Yeah.
Right? And the reality is you likely need to tweak it. But the second thing is also be ready to make sure that you have an investment, elegant investment that you're willing to put in place for the market. And it's not going to be a quick site kind of focus, but one that requires a dedicated effort around building that out.
Yeah. I agree. I think a lot of people think Japanese market is so big, but especially for B2B, when it comes to selling to the management or the person in charge, because of the seniority system, they won't be so open to a new SaaS or new technology. That kind of restricts actually the market size. And to crack into that, I think the trust part is very, very important. So I think it's very interesting that how you built that trust and also changed your GTM in your product. Can you also maybe walk us through a bit on how your investors helped you to enter into Japan? Yeah.
So I think one broad macro point, if I answer your question specifically, I think one of the really positive things I've noticed about Japan, this is just a personal observation, is over the last 3 years at least, 2-3 years at least, I've seen a huge amount of push on innovation.
Right.
Pretty much every corporate has a venture arm, I think, as you know it. And not just that, but from a government standpoint to a VC standpoint, I think there's a lot of renewed interest in the tech scene, in startup funding environment, and it does seem very vibrant. At least in the last year, in a sea of a slowing environment, Japan does seem to be at least from an outsider standpoint, a star that's still shining fairly bright. So I think that's a really great thing. And I think the second thing, to answer more specifically, how I think the Japanese investors really help our entry. So I think number one, it's by naturally knowing that. I think a very key thing when you go into the market, again, particularly more from a B2B standpoint, it's the other side of the table does want to know that are you bought into the market? Are you just saying entering the market, or do you actually have proper commitment in the market? That means you have a local team, a local entity, a local office, even if it's a co-working, they have a local investment in the market. And having local investors really helps with that validation that they want to know that you're here to stick around. You're not gonna endeavor for like a year, and then when things don't show up, you just kind of pack up and leave as well. So I think having that local investment is quite important. And the Japanese market, from the sales to the hiring, is quite a different one. So if you have a local investor that understands the market, they can much quicker get you up to speed as to how to navigate things like hiring. Your first few hires, likely you would want to get some help from your investor to make some intros. The first few partnerships that you want to have set up, a warm intro goes a very long way from there, right? So I think these are things that really matter. I'll say a Japanese investor does help that foreign company get an initial leg in early on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think on the first point, when you mentioned about how Japanese corporates are really pushing innovation, in my opinion, not in the very right way, because they're just setting up CVCs. And I'm actually predicting that these CVCs for kind of just put in the minority ticket into startups would not really financially return. So I have a prediction that a lot of corporates will actually stop the CVCs, and they would focus on either acquiring the company, a bit more bigger ticket, a bigger commitment. So I think now is a good time to really focus on, getting that investment for CVCs. And from there, you can kind of use that network to go into Japanese market, or, potentially become a, acquisition target for them. So this is, I think, very interesting time. And I think your story really kind of, shows that success. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think definitely. So, I mean, you're right. I think I have seen it. And again, I'm not an expert in this, so I don't want to strongly state, but every big corporate has a CVC. But you're right. Naturally, they're still also trying to figure out what's the best way to do this as well. But the good thing is, the investment in the capital is there, meaning they're putting their weight behind it to some extent, and I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
And for us, at least, when we brought on Japanese investors, similarly, we brought on a mix of VCs as well as a couple of CVCs that help give a blended kind of approach towards how we enter the market as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think lastly, maybe if you could just give a piece of advice for founders and startups that are in Southeast Asia and looking into Japan market.
Yeah, I mean, quite a lot. I mean, the first, maybe in 2-3 parts, Japan is a big market that's worth going after, but you do have to do your homework, whether it's one that you're willing and ready to actually properly invest into, and you have to be patient of it. Right, meaning say don't expect a quick win, but the very key and important point is once you do figure it out, it's actually a very, very it's a huge market with a lot of potential to grow in. As a Southeast Asian company, which today we don't see ourselves as a Southeast Asian company anymore. Like, we see us more as a regional and global firm with a Singapore headquarter. I think, but if you're a pure Southeast Asian play, naturally with the the goal of raising the ceiling of how big the company can grow, going beyond Southeast Asia is if you're B2B, is quite a key and meaningful point to explore. It doesn't mean it is definitely the right thing for everybody, to be clear, but for a number of companies, it actually is quite a meaningful point. And the last thing I'll add on Japan is a market. And as we know quite well, Japan it's in some ways very interesting, where many perceive it as innovative, but at the same time traditional at the same time. But I think what we've seen is a lot of the corporations, the general sentiment is people want to innovate and change. So there is, I think, a good amount of appetite to innovate and change now, as compared to maybe 5-10 years before. And I think that's where startups can come in to really capture some of this opportunity in whatever ways that they're tackling their sectors, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a very exciting time for founders here. Yeah. Thank you so much, Theo, for sharing your personal and a lot of your business insights. For listeners, I hope this was both inspirational and practical. Our firm, we help our founders and the portfolio companies to enter into Japan by making connections to our partners in Japan, but also by sharing these insights from founders. So stay tuned. We're going to be sharing more founder stories in the future.